To what extent does the Fair Access to the Legal Profession report provide a blueprint for action?
Well, I think it doesn't really provide much of a blueprint at all. It's much more of a discussion paper looking at the evidence for fair access as it stands at the moment. And it seems really to have deliberately avoided sort of narrowing down the options or looking to evaluate what possibilities there might be for reform. And I can understand why it's done that, but it's perhaps disappointing that a year after the report started, the debate, to my mind, really isn't much further forward than it was when the report started.
And what, for you, are the key issues that have to be tackled if it is to make a real difference?
Well, I can understand why the report focuses a lot at the start, certainly, on access to the law degree, and that clearly is a big issue for people who want to become lawyers. But for me, the key issue really is the structure of the diploma and the traineeship itself. And that's the thing the Law Society can control, of course, so I think that's really what the Law Society should be focusing on. And for me, the fact that you're inviting sort of 21, 22-year-olds to invest a year of their lives and, arguably £10,000 to £15,000 in this training package, which doesn't even necessarily lead to a job, I think that's an obvious obstacle for those who perhaps don't have, financial security or well-off families who they can rely on to assist if everything were to go wrong.
So, and do you accept that the Law Society has limited room for manoeuvre in attempting to make really radical changes?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question. I mean, certainly the Law Society has got limited room for manoeuvre. As I've suggested earlier, there's only some aspects of the route to qualification it controls. It can't control access to universities. It can't control what schools provide the necessary subjects for people to get into law degrees. So it has got limited in manoeuvre in some extent. But on the radical point, I think I'd probably disagree with that, in that it is a complex issue. It will be difficult to come up with a solution, but I think that actually requires leadership and boldness and imagination from the Law Society, because any given law firm, arguably, there's plenty of trainees or potential trainees to choose from, almost too many. So it'll take the leadership of the Law Society to start to drive forward the more radical reform. So I think the opposite is true, that the Law Society should be pushing for more radical reform.
And what would be your first steps in doing that?
Well, I think to a certain extent, almost the first step has already been taken. The Law Society has already come up with a single structure for the diploma and the traineeship in the sort of PEAT reforms that they've recently undertaken. And by putting those all together, that's already given us a structure for a much more integrated diploma and traineeship. And that's what I'd like to see happen. I think the next step beyond that would perhaps be to be less prescriptive. It's absolutely right that the Law Society should set the standards and the competence levels for people coming out of that process to become qualified lawyers. But I think they could be a little less prescriptive about how you do it. And that might leave a little bit of room for law firms or universities or training providers to come up with some ideas themselves which could take the debate forward. And I think finally it would be to work with the law firms themselves, both the big firms and the small firms, to look at how you could come up with, for instance, a more integrated diploma and traineeship where people could be learning whilst they're also earning their money as trainees and contributing to the firm as trainees and actually doing the work. And I think that would be better for the students, it would be better for the fair access question, and it would be better for the profession in the long run.
Tim Haddow, thank you very much.
Thank you.